The Kansas City evening air was crisp as Travis Kelce pulled his car into the valet parking area outside Le Bernardin, one of the city's most prestigious restaurants. The establishment's golden lights spilled onto the sidewalk, casting an elegant glow over the well-dressed patrons entering and exiting through its heavy oak doors. After an exhausting 3-hour training session, all Travis wanted was a quiet dinner, somewhere with excellent food and minimal attention. He stepped out of his vehicle wearing a simple gray hoodie, dark jeans, and comfortable sneakers. His hair was slightly tousled from the workout, and he carried himself with the relaxed confidence of someone who had earned his place in the world through years of dedication and hard work. The valet attendant, recognizing him immediately, offered a friendly smile, assured him his car would be well taken care of. As Travis approached the entrance, he noticed the restaurant's atmosphere was exactly what he had hoped for. Through the large windows, he could see intimate tables with flickering candles, servers moving gracefully between diners, and the warm ambiance that suggested this would be the perfect place to unwind after a demanding day. The menu posted outside promised innovative cuisine and an extensive wine selection. Standing at the entrance was Bartholomew Ash, the restaurant's maître d', a man in his 50s with perfectly styled silver hair and an impeccable black suit. Bartholomew had worked at Le Bernardin for over a decade, building a reputation for maintaining the establishment's exclusive atmosphere. He prided himself on being the guardian of the restaurant's standard and took his role as gatekeeper very serious. Travis approached the entrance with a genuine smile, ready to request a table for one. But before he could even speak, Bartholomew's eyes swept over him from head to toe, his expression shifting from professional courtesy to barely concealed disdain. The maître d' stepped slightly forward, blocking the entrance with his body language alone. "Excuse me, sir," Bartholomew said, his voice carrying a tone of condescension that made several nearby patrons turn their heads. "I'm afraid we have a very strict dress code here at Le Bernardin. Perhaps you would be more comfortable at the McDonald's around the corner?" He gestured dismissively toward the street, his eyes never meeting Travis's directly. Travis felt a flush of embarrassment creep up his neck. He had experienced discrimination before, but never quite this blatant. The other patrons waiting nearby began to whisper among themselves, some pulling out their phones to record what was clearly becoming an uncomfortable scene. Travis maintained his composure, his voice steady despite the humiliation. "I understand you have standards," Travis replied calmly, "and I respect that. I could certainly come back another time with more appropriate attire if that would be better." He reached into his wallet, ready to show identification if necessary, hoping to resolve the situation diplomatically. But Bartholomew had already turned away, his attention now focused on a well-dressed couple approaching behind Travis. "Right this way, Mr. and Mrs. Henderson," he said warmly, completely ignoring Travis, as if he had become invisible. The couple looked uncomfortable as they passed, the woman glancing back sympathetically. From across the restaurant's main dining room, Vincent Grantham watched the entire exchange. The owner was a man in his early 60s who had built Le Bernardin from nothing into one of Kansas City's most respected establishments. He had invested 20 years of his life into creating what he considered the perfect fine dining experience. Instead of intervening, Vincent simply nodded in approval of Bartholomew's action. Travis stood there for a moment longer, feeling the weight of the stares from other patrons. A young couple whispered to each other while looking in his direction, and an elderly woman shook her head in what appeared to be disapproval. The entire scene felt surreal, like something that shouldn't happen in 2024. Yet here it was unfolding in real time. Isabella Marchetti, a veteran server who had worked at Le Bernardin for 8 years, witnessed the entire incident from her position near the host's stand. She recognized Travis immediately and felt her stomach drop as she watched one of the NFL's most respected players being treated with such disrespect. Isabella knew that Bartholomew's actions were not only wrong, but potentially devastating for the restaurant's reputation. Travis took a deep breath and decided not to escalate the situation. He had learned through years of being in the public eye that sometimes the most powerful response was dignity in the face of injustice. He turned and walked back toward his car, his head held high despite the humiliation burning in his chest. As he reached his vehicle, Travis could hear the continued murmur of conversation from the restaurant's entrance. The valet attendant looked confused, having expected Travis to be dining there for at least an hour. "Everything okay, Miss Kelce?" the young man asked with genuine concern. Travis managed a small smile and simply said, "Change of plan." Isabella watched through the window as Travis's car disappeared into the Kansas City night. She felt a mixture of anger and profound disappointment in her workplace. This was not the kind of establishment she had believed she was working for. She knew that what had just happened would have consequences, though she couldn't yet imagine how far-reaching they would be. The evening continued normally inside Le Bernardin, with most diners unaware of what had transpired at the entrance. Vincent returned to his office, satisfied that his standards had been maintained. Bartholomew resumed his duties, believing he had successfully protected the restaurant's exclusive atmosphere. None of them realized that the next 24 hours would change everything they thought they knew about respect, dignity, and true class. The morning after the incident, Travis Kelce sat in his home office, staring at his laptop screen. He had spent most of the night thinking about what had happened at Le Bernardin, and the more he reflected on it, the more it bothered him. It wasn't just the personal humiliation, though, that stung. It was the realization that if this could happen to him, someone with resources and public recognition, what must countless others experience every day? Travis had always believed in addressing problems directly rather than letting them fester. His approach to conflicts, whether on the football field or in his personal life, was to face them head-on with honesty and integrity. He decided he wouldn't make a public spectacle of the situation, but he also wouldn't simply let it slide. There had to be a way to turn this negative experience into something constructive. Meanwhile, back at Le Bernardin, Isabella Marchetti arrived for her morning shift with a heavy heart. She had barely slept, replaying the scene from the night before over and over in her mind. As she tied her apron and prepared for the day, she noticed the usual pre-service energy was missing. The staff seemed subdued, and she wondered if others had witnessed what happened or heard about it through the restaurant's gossip network. Vincent Grantham was already in his office, reviewing the previous night's receipts and planning the day's special. He felt satisfied with how the evening had gone overall. The restaurant had served nearly 100 covers. The kitchen had performed flawlessly, and the atmosphere had remained refined and elegant. In his mind, Bartholomew had simply done his job by maintaining standards. However, Isabella couldn't shake her sense of injustice. During a quiet moment in the morning prep, she approached Vincent's office and knocked softly on the door. "Mr. Grantham, could I have a word with you?" she asked, her voice carrying a weight that made Vincent look up from his paperwork with curiosity. "Of course, Isabella." "What's on your mind?" Vincent replied, gesturing for her to sit in the chair across from his desk. Isabella had been one of his most reliable employees, and he respected her judgment, though he couldn't imagine what might be troubling. "I wanted to talk to you about what happened last night at the entrance," Isabella began carefully. "I think there might have been a misunderstanding with one of our potential guests." She chose her words deliberately, not wanting to sound accusatory, but hoping to open Vincent's eyes to what had really occurred. Vincent's expression shifted slightly, a defensive edge creeping into his voice. "If you're referring to the gentleman who wasn't appropriately dressed, I think Bartholomew handled the situation perfect. We have standards here, Isabella. That's what separates us from every other restaurant in Kansas City." "But, sir," Isabella pressed gently, "I think you should know that the man who was turned away was Travis Kelce. He's not just any customer. He's one of the most respected athletes in the city. And more importantly, he was polite and respectful throughout the entire interaction." Vincent's face hardened. "I don't care if he was the mayor himself. Our dress code applies to everyone equally. That's what makes it fair. We can't make exceptions just because someone has money or fame. That would be the real discrimination." Isabella felt a sinking sensation in her stomach. She had hoped that Vincent would understand the gravity of the situation, but instead, he seemed to be doubling down on his position. "Sir, I understand the importance of maintaining standards, but maybe there's a difference between having standards and being unnecessarily rigid." "Isabella," Vincent said firmly, "I've built this restaurant from nothing into one of the finest establishments in Kansas City. I've done that by never compromising on excellence. The moment we start making exceptions for celebrities or bending our rules for anyone, we lose what makes us special." The conversation was interrupted by Demetrius Washington, the head chef, who appeared in the doorway with a concerned expression. "Vincent, we need to talk." "There's something happening on social media that you need to see." Vincent looked puzzled as Demetrius pulled out his phone and showed him a video that had been posted overnight. The footage, taken by another patron, showed the entire incident at the restaurant's entrance. The video had already been shared thousands of times, with comments ranging from outrage to calls for boycotts. "This is from last night," Demetrius explained. "Someone filmed the whole thing and posted it online. The comments are brutal, Vincent. People are calling us elitist, discriminatory, and worse. Some are threatening to never eat here again." Vincent watched the video in stunned silence. Seeing the incident from this perspective, he could understand why it might look bad to outsiders. However, his instinct was to defend his establishment rather than admit any wrongdoing. "This is taken completely out of context," he said finally. "We have every right to enforce our dress code." Over the next few hours, the situation escalated rapidly. The restaurant's phone rang constantly with reporters requesting statements, angry customers canceling reservations, and food bloggers wanting to know if the allegations were true. Vincent found himself barricaded in his office, trying to figure out how to respond to the growing crisis. Isabella watched the chaos unfold with a mixture of sadness and frustration. She had tried to warn Vincent, but he had been too proud to listen. Now, the entire restaurant was paying the price for what she saw as a moment of unnecessary cruelty and rigidity. By midday, the story had been picked up by local news stations, and food critics were beginning to weigh in on social media. The narrative was clear. Le Bernardin was being portrayed as an elitist establishment that discriminated against people based on appearance rather than character. Vincent finally emerged from his office during the lunch, his face grim and his usual confident demeanor shaken. He could see the impact of the controversy on his staff. They were trying to maintain their professionalism, but the tension was palpable. Tables that should have been full were empty, and the few customers who had come seemed uncomfortable with the atmosphere. "This will blow over," Vincent told himself. But even as he spoke the words, he wasn't entirely convinced. He had worked too hard and come too far to let one incident destroy everything he had built. But as he watched Isabella serve the few remaining customers with forced cheerfulness, he began to wonder if his rigid adherence to rules had cost him something more valuable than he had realized. The next morning brought no relief for Vincent Grantham. He arrived at Le Bernardin 2 hours earlier than usual, hoping to find solace in the familiar routine of restaurant preparation. Instead, he was greeted by Evangeline Torres, his general manager, who held a stack of cancellation confirmations and a deeply troubled expression. "Vincent, we need to talk," Evangeline said without preamble. "We've had 37 reservation cancellations since yesterday, and the phone has been ringing non-stop with people wanting to express their opinions about the incident. Some of the comments are quite harsh." Vincent took the papers from her hands and scanned them quickly. These weren't just random cancellations. They included some of the restaurant's most loyal customers, people who had been dining at Le Bernardin for years. Among them was the Kansas City Business Association's monthly dinner, worth nearly $5,000 in revenue. "People are overreacting," Vincent said, though his voice lacked its usual conviction. "Once they calm down and think about it rationally, they'll understand that we were simply maintaining our standards. Good restaurants have dress codes. This isn't revolutionary." Evangeline shook her head. "It's not just about the dress code anymore, Vincent. People are saying we're out of touch, that we don't understand what hospitality really means. There's a food blogger with 200,000 followers who's planning to write a piece about elitism in fine dining, using us as the primary example." Vincent felt a familiar surge of defensiveness. He had faced criticism before during his 20-year journey of building Le Bernardin, and he had always weathered it by staying true to his principle. "Let them write their pieces," he said firmly. "We know who we are and what we stand for. True quality will always win out over popular opinion." However, Vincent's confidence was shaken when he received a call from Marcus Whitman, the president of the Kansas City Restaurant Association. Marcus had been a mentor to Vincent in his early days, and his opinion carried significant weight in the local dining scene. "Vincent," Marcus said without pleasantries, "I'm calling as a friend. You need to seriously consider how you're going to handle this situation. The video has been shared over 50,000 times, and it's starting to reflect poorly on our entire restaurant community." "Marcus, you know me," Vincent replied. "I've never discriminated against anyone based on anything other than our clearly posted dress code. This is being blown completely out of proportion." "Maybe," Marcus said carefully, but perception is reality in our business. I've watched that video a dozen times, and I have to tell you, it doesn't look good. The way your maître d' spoke to that man was dismissive and condescending. Whether or not you meant it as discrimination, that's how it's being perceived. After hanging up, Vincent found himself genuinely conflicted for the first time since the incident occurred. He had built his reputation on unwavering principle, but he was beginning to understand that those principles might be costing him everything he had worked to achieve. The lunch service was painfully slow. Tables that should have been fully booked sat empty, and the few customers who did come seemed uncomfortable with the atmosphere. Vincent watched from his office window as potential diners approached the restaurant, saw the protesters outside, and decided to eat elsewhere. Isabella Marchetti worked her shift with professional dedication, but Vincent could see the strain in her eyes. During a brief lull, she approached him with another concern. "Vincent, I've been thinking about what happened, and I believe there might be an opportunity here to show our community who we really are." "What do you mean?" Vincent asked, genuinely curious about her perspective. "Well, what if we use this as a chance to demonstrate that we're not the elitist establishment people think we are? What if we reached out to Travis Kelce directly and tried to make things right? Not because we did anything wrong, but because we want to show that we value all our community members." Vincent considered her suggestion, but his pride prevented him from fully embracing. "Isabella, I appreciate your concern, but reaching out now would look like we're admitting guilt. It would be like saying we were wrong to enforce our dress code, and that would set a dangerous precedent." As the day progressed, Vincent's resolve was tested by a succession of challenges. A food critic from the Kansas City Star called to inform him that they were planning a review of the restaurant's policy. Two of his regular wine suppliers contacted him with concerns about their business relationship. Even his insurance agent called to discuss potential impacts on his coverage. The breaking point came when Constance Whitmore, one of the restaurant's most valued regular customers, called to express her disappointment. Constance had been dining at Le Bernardin twice a month for over 5 years, and her opinion mattered deeply to Vincent. "Vincent, dear," Constance said, in her gentle but firm voice, "I've been thinking about what happened the other night, and I have to tell you, I'm troubled by it. I've always loved coming to your restaurant because it made me feel welcome and valued. But after seeing how that young man was treated, I'm not sure I can continue supporting an establishment that would make someone feel so unwelcome." Vincent felt as though the ground was shifting beneath his feet. "Constance, you know we would never intentionally make anyone feel unwelcome. We simply have standards that we believe enhance the experience for everyone." "I understand that, Vincent. But there's a difference between having standard and lacking compassion." That young man was polite and respectful, and he was treated poorly. "That's not the Le Bernardin I thought I knew." Halals. After Constance hung up, Vincent sat alone in his office, staring at the wall where his business awards and certificates hung. He had received the Kansas City Excellence in Hospitality Award 3 years running. The irony wasn't lost on him that his commitment to hospitality was now being questioned by the very people who had once celebrated. Demetrius Washington knocked on his door and entered without waiting for permission. "Vincent, we need to talk about the staff. They're starting to lose confidence in the direction we're heading. Isabella mentioned that she's been getting calls from other restaurants wanting to poach our team. If we don't address this situation soon, we might lose more than just customers." Vincent looked up at his head chef, a man he had trusted for over 8 years. "What do you think I should do, Demetrius? Everyone seems to have an opinion about how I should run my own restaurant. I think you should consider that maybe, just maybe, there's a middle ground between maintaining standards and showing compassion. Nobody's asking you to throw away everything you've built. They're asking you to consider that true hospitality means making people feel valued, not excluded." As the evening approached and Vincent prepared for another disappointing dinner service, he found himself more isolated than ever. His staff was questioning his judgment, his customers were abandoning him, and even his closest advisors were suggesting he reconsider his position. For the first time in his career, Vincent Grantham wondered if being right was worth losing everything he had worked so hard to create. The following afternoon, Vincent Grantham was in his office reviewing the morning's dismal reservation book when Evangeline Torres knocked urgently on his door. Her face carried an expression of complete bewilderment that immediately caught Vincent's attention. "Vincent, you're not going to believe this," she said, stepping into the office with hesitant steps. "Travis Kelce is here. He's asking to speak with you personally." Vincent felt his heart skip a beat. Of all the possible developments in this situation, this was the last thing he had expected. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "He's standing at the host stand right now," Evangeline confirmed. "He's impeccably dressed in a beautiful navy suit, and he's being incredibly polite to everyone. He specifically requested to speak with you privately." Vincent stood up, his mind racing through possible scenarios. Was this some kind of confrontation? A publicity stunt? A setup for further humiliation? He had been preparing for lawyers, protesters, and media attention, but not for a face-to-face meeting with the man at the center of the controversy. "Should I tell him you're not available?" Evangeline asked, clearly unsure about the best course of action. "No," Vincent said, after a moment's consideration. "If he wants to speak with me, then we'll speak. Show him to the private dining room." As Vincent walked through the restaurant toward the private dining room, he noticed how different the atmosphere felt. The usual busy energy was absent, replaced by a tension that seemed to affect everyone. Isabella caught his eye and nodded encouragingly, while Bartholomew looked distinctly uncomfortable at his host's stand. Travis Kelce was standing by the window in the private dining room, looking out at the Kansas City skyline. He turned when Vincent entered, and instead of the anger or confrontation Vincent expected, he saw something entirely different: calm dignity and genuine curiosity. "Mr. Grantham," Travis said, extending his hand, "thank you for agreeing to meet with me. I know this is probably the last thing you wanted to deal with today." Vincent shook Travis's hand, struck by the firmness of his grip and the directness of his gaze. "Mr. Kelce, I have to admit, I'm not sure what to expect from this conversation." "I understand," Travis replied, gesturing toward the chairs around the small table. "Mind if we sit? I think we might have more in common than either of us realizes." As they settled into their seats, Travis continued, "I want to start by saying that I didn't come here to cause more problems for you or your restaurant. I've been thinking about what happened the other night, and I believe there might be an opportunity for both of us to learn something from this situation." Vincent was surprised by Travis's measured tone. "I appreciate that, but I have to be honest with you. I don't believe my staff did anything wrong. We have a dress code, and it's applied consistently to everyone who enters our restaurant." "I respect that you have standard," Travis said, leaning back in his chair. "In fact, I admire it. Excellence requires standard. But I'd like to share something with you about my own experience with standards and how I've learned to distinguish between maintaining quality and excluding people." Vincent found himself genuinely curious, despite his defensive instincts. "I'm listening." Travis smiled and began to speak about his own journey. "When I was growing up in Cleveland Heights, my family didn't have much money, but my parents taught me that being broke didn't mean being broken. They showed me that character and respect were more important than what you wore or what you owned." "That's admirable," Vincent said. "But surely you understand that different environments require different approaches. A fine dining restaurant isn't the same as a family home." "You're absolutely right," Travis agreed. "But let me tell you about a time when I learned the difference between appropriate standards and unnecessary barriers. A few years ago, I was invited to a charity event at a very exclusive club. I wore what I thought was appropriate attire, but apparently my tie wasn't the right shade of blue for their particular dress code." Vincent listened intently as Travis continued his story. "The host could have handled it two ways. He could have embarrassed me in front of everyone, or he could have quietly offered me a different tie from their collection. He chose the second option, and it taught me that true class isn't about enforcing rules rigidly. It's about finding ways to maintain standards while preserving dignity." "That's a nice story," Vincent said, still somewhat defensive, "but I'm not sure how it applies to our situation. We don't keep a collection of appropriate clothing for underdressed guests." Travis nodded thoughtfully. "You're right, you don't. But what if the goal isn't to change the rule, but to change the approach? What if maintaining standards could be done in a way that educates rather than excludes?" Vincent felt something shift in his perspective, though he wasn't ready to admit it yet. "What exactly are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that maybe we both want the same thing, an environment where people feel valued and where excellence is celebrated. The difference is in how we achieve that goal." Travis leaned forward slightly, his voice becoming more personal. "Mr. Grantham, I've been in high-pressure situations my entire career. I've learned that the strongest leaders are those who can maintain their standards while still showing compassion. You've built something beautiful here. I can see the passion and dedication in every detail of this restaurant. Vincent felt his defenses beginning to lower despite himself. It's taken me 20 years to create this place. Every decision I make is aimed at maintaining the level of excellence that our customers expect. I can see that, Travis said sincerely. And I'm not asking you to lower your standards. I'm asking you to consider that maybe there's a way to maintain those standards while also showing the kind of hospitality that makes people feel welcomed rather than judged. The conversation continued for another hour, with Travis sharing stories from his own experiences with leadership, teamwork, and the importance of treating people with dignity, regardless of their circumstance. Vincent found himself opening up about his own journey, his challenges in building the restaurant, and his fear that any compromise would lead to a loss of the excellence he had worked so hard to achieve. As their meeting drew to a close, Travis made an unexpected offer. "Mr. Grantham, I'd like to propose something. What if we turned this situation into an opportunity to show Kansas City what true hospitality looks like? Not by changing your standards, but by demonstrating that excellence and compassion can coexist." Vincent looked at Travis with new respect. This wasn't the confrontation he had expected, but rather a conversation between two men who shared similar values but had different approaches to expressing them. For the first time since the incident occurred, Vincent began to consider that maybe there was a path forward that didn't require him to abandon his principle. That evening, Vincent Grantham sat alone in his restaurant long after the last customer had left. The conversation with Travis Kelce had affected him more deeply than he wanted to admit. He found himself walking through the dining room, looking at the empty tables and remembering the countless evenings when every seat had been filled with satisfied customers. The silence was broken by Isabella Marchetti, who had stayed late to help with closing duty. "Vincent, how did your meeting with Travis go?" she asked gently, her concern evident in her voice. Vincent looked up from the table he had been absently straightening. "It was unexpected. He's not what I thought he would be. He's thoughtful, articulate, and surprisingly understanding about the challenges of running a business like this." "That doesn't surprise me," Isabella said, settling into one of the nearby chairs. "I've always heard that he's a genuinely good person." "What did you two talk about?" Vincent sat down across, suddenly feeling the weight of the past few days. He talked about standard and compassion, about finding ways to maintain excellence while still treating people with dignity. He made some points that I'm still processing, such as, he suggested that maybe the goal isn't to change our standards, but to change how we implement them. He talked about the difference between educating and excluding, between maintaining quality and building walls. Isabella nodded thoughtfully. "That makes sense. I've always believed that our role in hospitality is to make people feel welcome and valued, not to find reasons to turn them away." Vincent was quiet for a long moment, lost in memories of his own past. "You know, Isabella, I haven't always been the owner of an exclusive restaurant. 30 years ago, I was a line cook at a diner on the south side of Kansas City. I worked double shift, sent money home to my mother, and dreamed of someday opening my own place." This was the first time Isabella had heard Vincent speak about his early days, and she listened intently as he continued. "I remember one night, I had been working for 16 hours straight, and I was exhausted. I decided to treat myself to dinner at a nice restaurant downtown. I had saved up for weeks to afford it, and I was so excited to experience fine dining from the customer's perspective." Vincent's voice grew quieter as he recalled the memory. "I walked into that restaurant wearing my best clothes, which weren't very impressive. The host looked at me like I didn't belong there, and even though I had a reservation, he seated me at the worst table in the restaurant, right next to the kitchen door. That must have been humiliating," Isabella said softly. "It was," Vincent admitted. "But what made it worse was how the entire staff treated me throughout the evening. The server was dismissive. The sommelier barely acknowledged my questions about the wine, and I could feel other diners looking at me like I was an intruder in their world." Vincent paused, his hands clasped tightly together on the table. "I promised myself that night that if I ever owned a restaurant, it would be different. It would be a place where excellence was celebrated, where standards mattered, where people understood that fine dining was about more than just food, too. And you built that," Isabella said, encouraging. "Le Bernardin is everything you dreamed it would be. But somewhere along the way, Vincent continued, his voice heavy with realization, I think I became the very person who made me feel unwelcome all those years ago. I became so focused on maintaining standards that I forgot about the human beings behind those standards. Isabella reached across the table and gently touched Vincent's arm. It's not too late to remember, Vincent. The fact that you're reflecting on this shows that the person who once felt excluded is still inside you. Vincent looked around his restaurant, seeing it through new eyes. Travis asked me something today that I can't stop thinking about. He asked whether my goal was to create a place that celebrated excellence or a place that excluded people. At first, I thought those were the same thing, but now I'm wondering if they're actually opposites. What do you mean? Maybe true excellence isn't about keeping people out. Maybe it's about bringing out the best in everyone who walks through those doors, regardless of what they're wearing or where they come from. Isabella smiled, seeing a glimpse of the man Vincent might have been before years of building walls around his establishment. Travis sounds like a wise person. He is, Vincent admitted reluctantly, and that's what bothers me the most. I was so ready to dismiss him as someone who didn't understand what we were trying to achieve here, but he understands perfectly. He just has a different approach to achieving it. Vincent stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the Kansas City streets, where people from all walks of life were going about their evening routine. He offered to help us find a way to turn this situation into something positive. He wants to show Kansas City that excellence and compassion coexist. Are you going to take him up on that offer? Vincent was quiet for a long moment, wrestling with decades of carefully constructed beliefs about what made a restaurant truly great. I don't know, he said finally. Part of me thinks that admitting I was wrong would be showing weakness, but another part of me wonders if admitting I was wrong might actually showing strength. Vincent, can I tell you something? Isabella asked, standing up to join him at the window. Of course. In all the years I've worked here, I've never seen you as weak. You built this place from nothing. You've weathered economic downturns. You've maintained your vision even when it was difficult. But the strongest thing you could do right now might be to admit that your vision could be even better. Vincent turned to look at Isabella, seeing the sincerity in her eyes. You really believe that? I believe that the best leaders are the ones who can evolve without losing their core value. Your core value has always been excellence, but maybe it's time to expand your definition of what excellence means. As they prepared to leave the restaurant, Vincent found himself thinking about the young line cook he used to be. The man who had dreamed of creating a place where everyone could experience the joy of exceptional food and service. Somewhere along the way, that dream had become narrow and exclusive. Isabella, Vincent said as they reached the front door, if I were to consider Travis's offer, what do you think that would look like? Isabella smiled, sensing that Vincent was finally ready to consider a different path. I think it would look like the restaurant you originally dreamed of creating, a place where standards matter, but where those standards are used to elevate people rather than exclude them. Vincent locked the door behind them and stood for a moment on the sidewalk, looking up at the Le Bernardin sign that had been his pride and joy for so many years. Tomorrow, he would have to make a decision that could change everything about how he ran his restaurant. But for the first time since the incident began, Vincent felt a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, there was a path forward that would honor both his commitment to excellence and his forgotten commitment to basic human dignity. 3 weeks later, Vincent Grantham stood before a packed house at Le Bernardin, preparing to address a room filled with local media, community leaders, and many of the customers who had supported the restaurant through its most difficult period. The decision he was about to announce had been the hardest of his professional life, but also the most liberating. Travis Kelce sat at a table near the front, having accepted Vincent's personal invitation to witness what he hoped would be a new beginning for the restaurant. Isabella Marchetti stood with the rest of the staff, her face beaming with pride at the transformation she had watched unfold over the past few weeks. Ladies and gentlemen, Vincent began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. 3 weeks ago, an incident occurred at this restaurant that forced me to examine not just my policies, but my principles. Today, I want to share with you what I've learned and announce some changes that I believe will make Le Bernardin a better reflection of what true hospitality should be. Vincent paused, looking around the room at faces both familiar and new. I built this restaurant 20 years ago with a dream of creating a place where culinary excellence could flourish. I established standards because I believed they were necessary to achieve that excellence. But I lost sight of something equally important: the truth that real excellence in hospitality means making every person who walks through our doors feel valued and respected. A murmur of approval rippled through the crowd as Vincent continued. I want to announce today that Le Bernardin will be implementing new policies that maintain our commitment to exceptional cuisine while embracing a more inclusive approach to hospitality. We will still maintain high standards, but those standards will focus on the quality of our service and food rather than rigid dress codes that can exclude good people. Vincent gestured toward Travis, who nodded encouragingly. I also want to announce a partnership with Travis Kelce and several local community organizations. Once a month, Le Bernardin will host Community Excellence Dinners, where we invite members of our community who might not otherwise have the opportunity to experience fine dining. The announcement drew enthusiastic applause from the audience. Vincent had spent weeks planning these dinners, working with local schools, community centers, and nonprofit organizations to identify individuals who had made significant contributions to Kansas City, but might not have the means to dine at an exclusive restaurant. These dinners won't be charity events, Vincent clarified. They'll be celebrations of the excellence that exists in every corner of our community. Excellence in teaching, in community service, in mentorship, in the countless ways people make Kansas City a better place to live. Isabella stepped forward as Vincent called her to join him. I also want to recognize Isabella Marchetti, whose courage in challenging my perspective helped make this transformation possible. Isabella has been promoted to Assistant General Manager, and she'll be overseeing our new community outreach initiative. Isabella's eyes filled with tears as the audience applauded. She had never expected her quiet conversation with Vincent to lead to such significant changes, both for herself and for the restaurant. Vincent's voice grew more personal as he continued. I learned something important from Travis Kelce during our conversation 3 weeks ago. He taught me that true leadership isn't about building walls to protect what you've created. It's about building bridges that allow others to experience the excellence you've worked so hard to achieve. Travis stood up and joined Vincent at the front of the room. Vincent has shown incredible courage in examining his own beliefs and choosing growth over pride. That's the kind of leadership that makes communities stronger. I want to share one more thing, Vincent said, his voice growing stronger with conviction. We're also implementing a new staff training program focused on recognizing excellence in all its forms. Our team will be trained to see past appearances and economic circumstances to identify the character and potential in every person who enters our restaurant. Demetrius Washington, standing with the kitchen staff, couldn't help but smile. The changes Vincent was announcing would make Le Bernardin the kind of workplace he had always hoped it could be, a place where culinary excellence and human dignity coexisted seamlessly. The past 3 weeks have taught me that apologizing isn't weakness, Vincent continued. Changing isn't betrayal of your principle. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is admit that your good intentions led to harmful action and commit to doing better. Vincent looked directly at Travis as he spoke his next word. Travis, I owe you a debt of gratitude for showing me that grace and strength can coexist, that maintaining standards and showing compassion aren't mutually exclusive. Travis stepped forward to address the crowd. What Vincent has done here is remarkable. He's shown that true excellence isn't about exclusion. It's about elevation. He's created a model that I hope other businesses will follow. As the formal presentation concluded, guests mingled throughout the restaurant, many expressing their excitement about the changes and their renewed commitment to supporting Le Bernardin. Reservations that had been canceled were being rebooked, and new customers were eager to experience what was being called Kansas City's most welcoming fine dining establishment. Later that evening, after the last guest had left, Vincent and Travis sat together in the private dining room where their first conversation had taken place. The contrast with that initial meeting was remarkable. The tension had been replaced by mutual respect and shared purpose. You know, Travis said, you've created something here that's bigger than just a restaurant policy change. You've shown that people can evolve, that businesses can change, and that admitting mistakes can actually make you stronger. Vincent nodded, feeling a peace he hadn't experienced in years. I keep thinking about that young line cook I used to be. How desperately he wanted to belong somewhere that celebrated excellence. Now I realize that the best way to honor that young man's dreams isn't to create barriers, but to remove them. 6 months later, Le Bernardin was thriving in ways Vincent had never imagined. The restaurant had not only recovered its previous customer base, but had attracted new diners drawn by its reputation for combining culinary excellence with genuine hospitality. The monthly community dinners had become Kansas City's most sought-after invitation, not because they were exclusive, but because they celebrated the inclusive excellence that Vincent had learned to embrace. Food critics wrote glowing reviews not just of the cuisine, but of the restaurant's atmosphere of warmth and welcome. Le Bernardin had become proof that maintaining high standards and embracing all people weren't opposing goals. They were complementary aspects of true hospitality. Standing in his restaurant one evening, watching a diverse group of diners enjoying exceptional food and service, Vincent reflected on the lesson that had transformed not just his business, but his understanding of what it meant to create something truly excellent. When a young reporter asked him about the transformation, Vincent smiled and shared the wisdom he had gained. "I learned that true elegance isn't about who you exclude from the table, but about how you make everyone feel worthy of being there. Excellence isn't diminished by inclusion, it's enhanced by it."